if I'm an SEC football coach and a guy walks onto my field and he's 5'10", 225 pounds, and he runs a 4.3 40, even with no football experience, I know, man, I could put that guy in some pads. He'd probably do pretty well as a running back. You look at your existing payroll, we can measure to what degree your talent is optimized or sub-optimized. Well, if I take the approach of, well, I'm going to treat other people like I want to be treated, 95% of the time, I'm going to miss it. I'm going to get it wrong. We hire the right people, and then we mismanage them. We miscommunicate. We don't allocate work to them in light of what they're gifted at or what they're motivated for, or miscommunicate and things like that. And then the A player becomes a C player, or they leave. Hey, you've been doing really well. Let's promote you into a leadership role. Well, maybe now it would be career suicide in their brains if they're like, oh, no, I don't want to lead anybody.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Everest Property Management Show. I am your host, Spencer Sutton, and today I've got a special guest joining me from Nashville, Tennessee. I have got the one and the only Matt White, who is a Culture Index advisor, and I'm excited about this because we are going to dig in to why we're so passionate about it over here at Evernest, and we're going to hear it straight from someone who talks about Culture Index all day, every day. So, Matt, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you, Spencer. Excited to be here.
Well, Matt, you and I kind of go back a ways. We've known each other for quite some time. I don't even know how many years, but back in the old Iron Tribe days.
More than 10.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely more than 10.
Yeah.
I think so I knew you, I think, back even before Iron Tribe, but you were in Birmingham at that time, and now you're in Nashville, and we've also got a mutual friend who kind of keeps us in touch with each other every once in a while, and so so I'm excited to talk to you about this. So why don't we just kick off? I would love for you to, just for our audience, because, again, this is so very, very important to what we're building here at Evernest. And I always encourage, whenever I'm talking with people about hiring people, growing their team, scaling their business, I'm always talking about the importance of understanding personality types for different positions. So I would love for you just to tell people a little bit about what Culture Index is and why it's so important that people pay attention to these things as they are growing their teams.
Yeah, so this is, as far as I know, this is the cutting edge of psychometrics or human analytics, which is, you take psychology, you take statistics and probability, and we're able to collect or create data that will then tell us how someone is naturally wired up. And then why that's so important is our personality drives our natural behavior. And so if I'm a business owner, why that's really important to me is if I'm able to look at data that's going to tell me what kind of environment someone's going to thrive in, and it's going to tell me how they're going to behave under pressure, and it's going to tell me how they're going, like what their motivational drives are, or where they draw confidence from, I then am better equipped to know how to deploy my human capital into roles that they are naturally gifted for, right? We're from the South. I'm a big college football fan, and it's like if I'm an SEC football coach and a guy walks onto my field and he's 5'10", 225 pounds, and he runs a 4.3 40, even with no football experience, I know, man, I could put that guy in some pads. He'd probably do pretty well as a running back. But if he comes and says, hey, man, I'm a nose guard, or I'm a defensive tackle, and that's what I played in high school, I'm like, okay, but you're not going to play it for my team because on this playing field, that doesn't work because those odds are against us if you're 225 going against 375. And so it just helps me when we're measuring and we're understanding what somebody's personality is. And I honestly, Spencer, I don't even really like to use the word personality because it just, for me, and maybe this is my own bias, it just has a negative context of like frou-frou or kumbaya. I'm looking at it like this, is like your human capital, that's your greatest leading indicator of P&L performance. right? And so as an owner or as a leader, I want the most accurate analytics that I could find that will tell me what's going to happen when I put this person in a role. So that's why, I mean, I think that's why it's important, right? Because I can look at this team and tell, well, this may sound a little arrogant, but we can look at this data and tell you what's going to happen when these people start working together. What's going to happen when you take this 225-pound running back and you put him as a linebacker? So that's why it's important in my opinion.
Well, and I see that. And so the way we're using it here at Evernest is we have different positions that we're trying to hire for, and we've set what we call a C job, I think is what it's called. It's essentially saying the best fit for this, the best, I don't want to say personality trait, but the best pattern for this position is
it's behaviors.
Yeah, that's right. The best behaviors.
It's like,
I was just going to say the best behaviors for this position would be this. And so when somebody fills out the application and they fill out that culture index survey, if they're complete opposite, we don't even talk to them about that position. And so let me ask you this, though. That's on the hiring end. What about for people who are out there? Let's just say they hire you and they say, hey, Matt, we've already got human capital that we're working with. We got a team of 15, 20 people, and we want to hire you. We want you to come in. How do you fix something if you come in and all of a sudden they're taking these tests and they come back and you realize that some people are in the wrong seat? How do you deal with that? Or what should a business owner be thinking about then?
So I would say number one is that these analytics help us understand how a person is wired up and where they draw confidence from. And why that's important is if someone draws confidence in something, let's say for you as a highly social person, you're naturally confident in relationships and connection. So that's what you're going to do, whether I pay you or not. So then when we come into teams, and I mean, candidly, I would guess 75 to 80% of my consulting with my current clients is not even around hiring. It is around how do we look at our team and how do we measure if our personality traits drive natural behavior, then understanding someone's personality is essentially saying, I'm going to understand what is the potential of this engine. Mm-hmm. What can they do? So like if we're talking about for relationships and you've got a high B, your potential for building relationships is much higher than mine as a lower B. Okay. But then we're also measuring when you show up to work, how are you modifying who you are? And that's where you get into understanding, okay, if this is who a person is, and then how they're showing up to work every day, and this person's turning off their superpower, then a few things are going to happen. Number one, eventually that person will become disengaged because God has wired us up with innate abilities and unique abilities and strengths. And part of that is when we come to work as owners or leaders of a business, I want to know, am I fully leveraging or optimizing my payroll? And so that's one of the greatest levers I think we can switch or turn or move, or dials that we can move in a company. Is like you look at your existing payroll, we can measure to what degree your talent is optimized or sub-optimized. I just left a workshop. I had a guy in there talking about the social ability. So he was less motivated by social interaction than 98% of the people on the planet. So he's sitting here on the front row and he's sitting right next to the president of the company. And I don't remember his name, but I said, and I was kind of a little jab at him, said, hey, thank you for coming out of your cave and joining us today in the workshop. Got a little kick at it. And then I said, so hypothetically, I've never met this guy before, but I said, hypothetically, if you came to work and you could spend the first 2 or 3 hours of the day not having to talk to anybody, not answering any questions, and just sit in your office with the door shut and crunch work, how much more productive could you be? He smiled. He said a lot. I said, well, quantify it. He said, I'd be 60% more productive if they'd leave me alone. He's sitting right next to his president that's been working with him. So it's like, if we can get this, I don't want to call them hacks, but it's just like, it's just data that tells us, here's the way that here's this talent. here's how you can fully optimize it. I mean, you start doing math and you start thinking about payrolls where we're writing check. I mean, how many business owners really feel confident when they write that payroll check? I'm getting 100% ROI out of that, or productivity out of my payroll. I know it.
Yeah, I
think that's where it's. Anyway, go ahead.
I think that's a great point. And especially when you're thinking about a small company, small companies tend to have generalists, right? So people are doing a lot of different things, right? They're having to like have customer interaction and maybe they're doing accounting and they're doing a lot of different things. But as you grow, you have to be more specialized. And so I think it starts to make a ton of sense, especially when you're talking about, hey, how could we switch this person's role so that they're 60% more efficient or 50% more efficient, to your point. So Matt, let me ask you this. What about when people, let's just say I have somebody on my team who reports to me. My personality is I'm more extroverted, I'm more social, hey, this is who I am. I've got a high A, high B, no D, and I hope people, well, let me back up. Ignore what I just said about the A, because you don't know what that means if you're listening to this, but Matt does, so he understands what I'm saying. But somebody that reports to me is the complete opposite of my personality. How should an owner be thinking about that when they're wired one way? How do they lead somebody who's wired completely different? Do they need to think about that? Like, hey, I should be leading them differently than I would lead somebody who has my exact personality? Does that make sense?
So, I was in North Carolina last week training a logistics and oil company, and one of the core values in the training room was we treat other people how how you want to be treated. And kind of at the beginning of the workshop, said, "Gang, we got to take that down." I said, "That's a terrible strategy." Because we study 19 patterns. Well, if you do the math, about 5% of the world would have your pattern. Well, if I take the approach of, well, I'm going to treat other people like I want to be treated, 95% of the time, I'm going to miss it. I'm going to get it wrong. And I said, what we want to focus on is if I can understand that there's 19 patterns and 18 of them are not mine, I want to know, how do I lead? How do I communicate? How do I manage? How do I motivate to those 18 different animals so I don't run them out of the zoo? So yeah, that's why it's a bulk of, this is really helpful for hiring. But man, like if I, we know this, if I hire you as an A player and you come under me and I treat you like I want to be treated, and we have different profiles, there's some similarities, but there's some big differences. And if I treat you like I want to be treated, there is a high risk that eventually you're going to be demotivated. And then what happens to our A player? That's why this is not primarily a hiring tool, because I've seen even my clients still do it. We hire the right people and then we mismanage them. We miscommunicate. We don't allocate work to them in light of what they're gifted at or what they're motivated for, or miscommunicate and things like that. And then the A player becomes a C player or they leave. And so, in terms of, we want to treat people how the people want to be treated. And then I would say it goes back to a step further. It makes it easier if I find somebody prior, like if I find somebody who's naturally wired up to do that role. Let's say I've got an offensive role in my company. If I find somebody who's naturally wired up to play offense, that makes things easier. All right, obviously. I still need to learn. There's all kinds of nuances on how we can motivate community. And that's what we do in that workshop, that I just referenced, is that if there are, you got all these motivational, there's 3 motivational drives where people draw confidence from. And I actually read that from an article that Harvard produced. And so what we're looking at is like, how is there data that can help us tap into understanding the motivational drives and the communication styles of people as fast as possible to ramp them up to competency as fast as possible, and then keep them engaged at the highest possible level.
So how do you how does a business owner deal? So you're saying, hey, I'm coming into these businesses, we're evaluating their entire team, and you're looking at it. And so like I just looked at one the other day. I was actually talking to a friend, and they have somebody who's a recruiter. So it's a sales position. And when I looked at their profile, or asked about their profile, they were what I would consider when I heard the profile, it was a craftsman. So a craftsman in culture index language is somebody who is super detail oriented. Like the head of our accounting department, Curran Melgarejo, is a craftsman. He is very detail oriented. He is in the numbers. He wants to be left alone, wants to close his door and do his work. How do you and this person was in sales. So when you're evaluating a company and you come in and you see, holy crap, people are in the wrong seat. How do you help a business owner deal with that? Like, what are those discussions like? Because they're running a role, and yes, you may say, hey, if something doesn't change, they're going to burn out, they're going to disengage. But you can't move them into a role that they're not equipped to. You can't move them into accounting, and if they're in a sales role. So how do you help a business owner think about that?
What I've seen is it's very tempting to make assumptions. Oh, a craftsman can't sell. That guy I just referenced when I made a joke about him coming out of his cave to join us in the workshop, and he's less social than 98% of the people on the planet. The president right next to him said, "This is our top salesperson." And he was a low B and a high D. And so then you go back to it and said, and I actually, what we were talking about was social, like how much confidence people draw from their relationships. And it's like, we want to go in and not just say, oh, like we don't, pigeonhole people. And it's like not cookie cutter. Oh, there's Spencer's profile only does this really well. We don't know. This craftsman profile only does accounting. That's not true. I would say it depends. Like classic example, say, oh, you think about a salesperson. Well, we're going to go in and we're going to do a lot more diagnostic questions. Well, okay, what do you need out of a salesperson? Well, I need them. We've got because it's just so different, right? If I've got a marketing machine that is just generating leads, I don't want your profile, Spencer, in a sales role, because I need someone who's more customer service oriented, great follow up, get it done, walk people through our process on how we do a deal together. Like there's very different kind of like think for example, like a farmer salesperson versus a hunter salesperson. Those are radically different profiles. Does it make sense?
Yeah, makes total sense.
So when we come in and because I've been asked that question before after like a demo with a CEO, they're like, wow, what if I realize I got some C-level people in the wrong spots? I say, well, first thing is we're going to come in and we're going to teach you how do you communicate to these people who are not like you. That alone, if we can understand how to communicate and see things from the same angle instead of spending 7 meetings circling the wagons, talk about the same thing because we're missing the way that we communicate, from how much detail information you need versus analytics versus experience and all this other stuff, we can improve the level of performance simply from teaching you how to, all right, hey, you got 19 profiles. Here's the way you use this one. Here's the way you use this one. Here's the way you communicate to this one. But then long-term is like after the leaders go through this workshop and they understand the data and how they're wired up and what their motivational drives are, we're then able to have a little bit more high-level conversations about, okay, so then where do we need these superpowers on this bus? Right? In my experience, very rarely have I seen a client like fire somebody because of our program. What I see them do is they like, oh, wow, we've got some grossly underutilized talent here, and we're going to leverage them over here. I mean, that was even my own experience when I was a client. I was like, it was really fun in the startup days. And then when I went to managing a bunch of franchisees, that was not my skill set. And I was dying on the vine. And we see that all the time. And that's a lot of times why people leave company. It's not necessarily for money. It's because, man, I just don't have enough opportunity to do what I'm naturally wired up to do.
So do you think when you are, let's go back to the hiring piece. So do you think when you are hiring people, like I think we found this to be incredibly helpful because, to your point, even though you're saying, hey, a craftsman could be a great salesperson, typically that may not be the case. And so maybe your chances of hiring the right person increase dramatically by using something like this. Talk a little bit about it being used in the hiring process.
So when we talk about psychometrics, we're talking about using statistics and probability to increase the likelihood of success in making decisions about human capital. We don't replace your gut. That is very important. We don't measure someone's experience, right? Like I might have the perfect profile for a role in your company, but if I've never done a day of property management in my life and I got a great profile from it, just the ramp up of me learning property management language is going to cost the company money. So it's like, experience is really important. We don't measure maturity. We don't measure character and values and integrity and things like that. So there's all those other things that we don't measure. However, most of the clients will have a solid pipeline of candidates. And when we do our due diligence and say, okay, well, in this role, let's just call it a property manager. In this property manager, I need a high level of attention to detail. I need to be more concerned about following our playbook rather than trying to create a playbook and blah, 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 blah. We can predict and say, okay, these are the behaviors that this person would be doing about 80 to 90% of the time. So then when we get our results on the front end of the selection process, we are then equipped to know, all right, well, this person's natural drives and motivations fit what we need in this role from a behavioral standpoint. So what that tells us, that doesn't tell us they want the job. It just says that if they get that, they're going to come to work and it's going to be fairly effortless. So you're like, what drains our batteries and wears us out? It's not working 50 hours a week. It's when a significant percentage of my time in the job, I'm trying to become somebody I'm not. Right? So that's what we're trying to do is like, let's hire somebody who naturally is wired up to do the behaviors that we need in that job. Because then work feels a lot less like work.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So we use it here at Evernest. We use it as a starting point just to help us increase our odds of putting the right person in the right seat. And then we walk them through. Then we have a phone interview. Then we have a face-to-face. Then we have a culture because our culture is so very important. Then we have a culture. So it's really like passing them through 4 filters. And to your point, you can't replace your gut. You don't want to replace your gut, and you don't want to replace like your culture filters and things like that. So I think that's really important. I was just talking to Jacob before we hopped on here, and I was telling him, I said, okay, I hired 2 people. They were for the same role. One I hired, and then I hired another one a year later, and they were both doing the same role with different profiles. And one of them was more detail oriented. They had less autonomy, so they weren't really comfortable taking the lead and just like going and getting stuff. But they were doing the role extremely well. So I was like, oh, they're doing exactly what they needed to be. So when I hired the other person, she actually had a little bit different personality. She still had a high attention to detail and could do everything the other person could. However, she had high autonomy. So she was a go-getter. And so what ended up happening over the next 2 years was she just was like, whereas this other person was crushing their work, doing the work and getting everything done perfectly just the way we needed them to. This other person was doing that, but then she started going, well, Spencer, what about this? Hey, what about this? Mm-hmm. Have you thought about fixing this? Hey, you know what? I think I could take this project on. And all of a sudden, she started taking more and more on. And now today, she's the director of marketing. I've kind of like stepped into a different role, and she's running the marketing department because she's just really gifted at it and really good and has a lot of drive. And so even though I saw that on paper, it was really interesting to actually see it play out over like 2 years. So This is one of the reasons we love this,
Well,
because then I know that she's playing into her strength. She wasn't forcing that. She was like, this is what I want to do.
And, I had a call with a client at the beginning of the year, and we got on the call and we're annual, like, how are we measuring success with our program this year? What are the needs of the business? Blah, blah, blah. And got on, the tone was kind of somber as an engineering company. And I said, what's going on, gang? They said, well, our number one engineer just turned in their 2 weeks notice. I said, okay, why was he number one engineer? CEO said he was the most profitable person we had. And we dove into it. And this was a guy that we had actually had a conversation about 6 months earlier in June of last year. And they were going to take their number one engineer and do what with him? Promote him into what?
Management.
Managing a bunch of engineers. And they lost their number. And I advised again, I was like, hey, you got to be very careful. This dude does not want a lot of direct reports. But they were like, oh, but we had to. We didn't have anybody else. And it's like, you had choices. And here's what I'm saying that is like, and what I love about your story is this gives us data about people to know if we're stewards of our human capital, our job is to manage them to the best and greatest degree we can. And that means also helping them think for where are you going to shine 1 year, 3 years, 5 years from now inside our organization if those opportunities are there. So that's some part of my favorite conversation is talking about succession planning and like where are these people going to be doing really well and what kind of opportunities do they need?
Yes.
And then not coming to some of those people who are like you were talking about, it's like the first person is just like grind it, do it, follow it and get it done. A lot of times we come and we'll say, hey, you've been doing really well. Let's promote you into a leadership role. Well, maybe no, it would be career suicide in their brains if they're like, oh, no, I don't want to lead anybody. No one's going to say that. But we would know this, like there are certain profiles that they're going to do a much better job as an individual contributor or having 1 or 2 direct reports versus being really good at the job and then managing 15 people.
Right. Yeah, I 100% agree. And it's almost like, especially in a high growth company, a fast paced company, maybe it can feel like the pressure is, hey, you need to achieve success. You need to manage a bunch of people, right? Like that's kind of the thought process sometimes, and maybe even the culture of some companies. But I agree with you. I'd rather say, hey, if you're a fantastic individual contributor and you're happy there, then keep crushing it. And because what we want, if you leave Evernest, what we say is we want you to shoot out of the top, not fall out of the bottom. And shooting out of the top means, hey, when you leave, you're not leaving because you're doing something you hate. It's because you found another opportunity, or maybe you're going to start your own thing, whatever the case is. We want to cheer you on. And, and so that's a fantastic point. So some of you out there listening, you may have people on your team that are just fantastic individual contributors and they want to stay there and they're happy there. And there's nothing wrong with that. You don't get some status bonus for leading and managing people. It's actually pretty difficult. To your point, I think when we were just about to record, you're like, hey, the biggest problems in companies, it's not the business you do, it's the people that you lead. It's very difficult.
It is. Yep.
All right. I want to make sure I get you this question. I know we don't have much time here. Okay, this is a question that I got from somebody that wanted me to make sure I ask you this. How can you use an employee's profile to determine the best way to give them positive feedback? Can you provide examples of 2 different CI types and how you would offer positive feedback?
I think for those that are listening to this that have no idea what we're measuring, that this might not be super helpful, but for that specific question, if you look at somebody who actually, you know what? So there's some sort of mine. I look at him as a mentor named Michael Alasso, and I interacted with, you may have remember him. We had him as a consultant and advisor to us at Iron Tribe back in the day, but I remember him always talking about TSP. And I'm bringing this up because I actually read a LinkedIn post that he wrote 2 days ago about TSP, and I think he coined that, and it means true, specific, positive feedback. And even in his article, he's like, he contrasted the difference between when you're giving positive feedback, instead of saying, "Hey, good job," like slowing down and being very specific. Now, I would argue in terms of the traits that we're measuring, specifically for a lower A with a higher B, slowing down to connect good job to be specific of, "Hey, Spencer, yesterday in the team meeting, I saw that you called out every team member in there. You also regurgitated back to them something positive that they said that added value. You listened, you made them feel heard," but like going specific about the feedback. So it's like positive feedback. When you get specific, maybe I don't know if that's answering the right question, but I noticed that like even in my own relationships, I don't do a great job of connecting very specific feedback about like when I give that and tying that specific feedback back to the outcome that they're helping us achieve. Right. So I don't know. You might have to read that question to me again. I can't remember the original question.
No, I think that's good. She was just wanting to she just wanted to know, can you provide examples of two different CI types, culture index types, and how you would offer positive feedback. But I think your point is it's more about being very, very specific and tying it back to the outcome versus like, because I'm imagining like my profile is way different than say Curran, who's in accounting. I'm in marketing, he's in accounting.
Yeah.
The feedback may be the same because it needs to be very specific and tied back to the outcome, but the way it's delivered, it doesn't really matter. Would you agree with that? Like I don't need I don't know, so my profile's a rainmaker. How would you, Matt, how would you encourage me, the person in marketing, how would you encourage me differently than you would encourage Curran, who's in accounting?
So I'm looking at your two traits of your relationship, okay? And you're also your high A. So I know you've got self-confidence and you're getting relational confidence. And so your winning for you in life is winning with people. So when I'm giving you feedback and I'm connecting what you're doing with people and specifically like how you make people feel, and I'd reference a specific conversation, or even better, I was talking to Jenny and I asked Jenny questions about you, and I got information from Jenny about how you're treating her and what that's meant to her, and then I relay that back to you. And now as a rainmaker, you don't want a bunch of details, but you want to know, man, I'm making an impact on her. You go to was it Curran?
Curran, yeah.
Yeah. So when as a lower B, he's going to respond positively or more effectively to private recognition, right? Because like he doesn't care about what the public thinks. He's more introspective and analytical. So when I'm connecting what he's doing in accounting with how that's moving the needles for either people underneath him, how he's leading them through clarity, with accuracy, with concise direction, which is what he's really good at, and how that's making a difference on people, or with what he's doing in terms of the financials and how that helps me as a business owner or as his leader make good decisions for our business. I bring at it that way. But so the challenge is when you in our brains, when we go to 19 patterns, right? And it's like I can tell you, how do you give all 19 patterns feedback or positive feedback the way they want it, or even if they want positive feedback? And it depends on, that's why it's very difficult for me as an advisor to make up generalities, because I could say, well, for, social people, they generally want this. For introspective analytical people, they generally like this. But we want to give our clients really clear instruction on like, here's what you do with this specific combination of the traits. So it's a difficult question to answer.
Well, Matt, this has been fantastic. Appreciate your time. And listen, everybody who's listening, we are huge believers in Culture Index. We use it every single day. Again, for hiring, for looking at people within the organization. And listen, I think between Culture Index and the Who method, how we hire from the book Who, I think it's really been impactful, helped us make really, really good decisions. And so if you want to get in touch with Matt, I'm going to put all of his information in the show notes. If you're watching this on YouTube, we'll put it in the YouTube, in the description. And feel free to reach out to him. He'll get in touch with you. Y'all talk, and yeah, I just highly encourage it. So Matt, man, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for being big fans and using it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we're going to keep using it. So, all right, everybody, that's it for this episode of the Everest Property Management Show. We'll be back next week with a new episode.